morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Real Estate Live UK. We're delighted to be with you this morning, and in fact all this week. We will be bringing together many people from across the whole of the UK to talk about the property business, the real estate business, and exactly what we're all doing together to make the UK build back better in these difficult and extraordinary times. Now, Real Estate Live UK is brought to you by White Label, and we're really grateful to all of our partners and sponsors that have made this week possible and enabling all of you to watch us for free throughout the week. Now, Real Estate Live returns after a week in June. Back then, we were very much in the eye of the storm, wondering what the next few months were going to bring. And just 4 months later, we're back again, and actually not a lot has changed. We are all still very much in a state of flux, but what we have discovered over the last few months is that, in fact, the real estate business has remained very buoyant. There is much still happening, and that part of the economy has remained fairly strong. So we're going to be really interested to hear from all of our panels across the week about exactly what the opportunities and challenges are for the coming months. Now, this morning we're opening with our UK keynote, and we're delighted that we have all 4 home nations represented here this morning. It's a great way to kick off what I know is going to be a great week. Now, before I introduce you to our panelists, for those of you watching, I'm sure you're all very au fait now with Zoom, but for those of you that aren't, this is about hearing from you. This is a conversation. We want to encourage you to be part of the conversation and the debate, and I'm sure you all know, but for those of you that don't, you can join us this morning by using the facilities on Zoom. And as a reminder, you can chat to us using the chat function, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. Do feel free to talk to us, share insights, links to things that you think we will all find interesting, but also, very importantly, you can ask us questions, and we do really want you to challenge our panelists this morning and to be part of that debate. So do please use the Q&A function to talk to us this morning, and myself and our chair of the panel, Gavin, will come to you and ask you those questions on your behalf. Now, this morning, I'm delighted that we do have Gavin Winbanks. Now, Gavin is the Director of Capital Investment and Entrepreneurship at the Department of International Trade. And to kick things off, I'm going to ask Gavin to take over, introduce our panel, and we look forward to hearing from you all in due course. Hi, Gavin.
Morning, Catherine, and morning to all the attendees that have joined us here today. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Gavin Winbanks, Director for Capital Investment and Entrepreneurship at the Department for International Trade. I'm absolutely delighted that to be joined by an all-star cast from across the UK. Before I quickly introduce them to you, allow me to just quickly tell you a bit more about what we're hoping to discuss today. Is going to see industry leaders taking part in the virtual panel to look at the impact for the UK across major cities, what are the challenges and opportunities they're currently facing, and the impact that Brexit and other issues will have moving into 2021. As mentioned, I'm the Director for Capital Investment and Entrepreneurship, and I'm responsible for attracting international investors into the UK with a particular focus on real estate. And so I have the pleasure of engaging with the panelists on a range of different issues and opportunities. Today, we're joined by Suzanne Wylie, Chief Executive of Belfast City Council, Jules Pipe, London's Deputy Mayor, Planning, Regeneration and Skills, Tony Reeves, Chief Executive, Liverpool City Council, Melanie Leech, CBE, Chief Executive of the British Property Federation, Councillor Suzanne Aitken, Leader of Glasgow City Council, and Hugh Thomas, Leader of Cardiff City Council. Allow me to kick off with the first question. I'm going, if I can, to go to Suzanne Aitken. Susan, many cities and regions across the UK are looking at their recovery strategies post-COVID-19. And at DIT, we've been working on resilient sectors and supporting international investors looking to deploy capital into these sectors. How has Glasgow been looking to stimulate economic recovery? And what are its major growth sectors, and what sort of development is welcome? Over to you.
Good morning, Gavin. Good morning, everyone on the session today. It's a pleasure to be here from sunny Glasgow this morning. We're deep in the heart of planning and indeed implementing recovery with a public, private and indeed third sector partnership, civil society partnership put in place actually fairly early on in the pandemic in order to respond as quickly as possible. And I think one of the truisms that's emerged from this pandemic is that we can change faster and more fundamentally than we had thought before. We do have the ability to do that. And the necessity of recovery is adding real urgency to existing plans. This isn't necessarily about reinventing the wheel or coming up with something brand new, but about adding that urgency and acceleration to the plans we had in place already, particularly where there's an overlap of the economic recovery, sustainability and an inclusive recovery as well, all of which certainly in Glasgow we're planning to go hand in hand. So for us in that context, our River Clyde has again emerged as arguably Europe's biggest unrealised or only partly realised development opportunity just now. Prior to the pandemic, Glasgow, along with our neighbouring local authorities, the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise, the National Enterprise Agency, had been working together to explore how best to re-energise the transformation of our riverfront and regain the momentum that had begun during the early 2000s. So we've established the Clyde Mission, which has ambition and vision, but also something very realisable and practical to build on. The Riverside's already the location for a whole range of pioneering work. Regeneration at Clyde Gateway in the east end of the city, which is particularly aligned with the work that went on, the legacy of the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow from 2014. The Barclays development at Tradeston, which when that inward investment was secured a couple of years ago, was one of the biggest inward property investments that had been secured in the UK in the post-2008 crash period, and which is proceeding apace just now. The innovation districts that are structured around our universities, the University of Glasgow and the University of Strathclyde, new infrastructure linking both banks of the river, and the advanced manufacturing and innovation district out adjacent to the airport just outside the city boundary, and the expansion of the Scottish Events Campus. So a whole number of projects that are either already underway or with committed funding and within Glasgow's immediate footprint, and with a whole range of associated and spin-off development opportunities coming from that committed public sector and already committed private sector investment. We know that flooding is a risk to the Clyde's potential, and it requires an engineering solution, and that work's underway. Whatever solution emerges will have an immeasurable impact in realising the waterfront's potential and also responding to the climate emergency. And the door is open already. The Clyde Mission has secured £35 million of funding of Scottish Government from infrastructure resource. Riverside capital projects have a window to access that seed money, and it's a shared recovery priority locally, regionally and nationally. Scottish Government is very much behind our local efforts on this. And that's because we believe that investment in the Clyde and in the Glasgow's riverfront benefits the whole of Scotland. It is an economic and indeed social recovery driver for the whole of Scotland nationally. That's our message to ministers, but it's also our message to the development community and the real estate community is this is a development opportunity which has resonances far beyond simply a development right on in the place that it's in. It is a place-based strategy, but it's a place-based strategy with layers of impact. And I think those overlapping priorities of a green recovery, social justice and an economic recovery also crystallise around the north of the city in Glasgow, which is an area that's been scarred by Glasgow's industrial past, with too many pockets abandoned for too long. And in recent years, we've invested again an enormous amount of public money to put our confidence in that part of the city to regenerate and reclaim post-industrial land for the development of desirable, connected, sustainable and green new communities. So we've got proposals for 3,000 new homes north of our canal, which is Glasgow's other waterfront, perhaps less well known. And the COVID recovery gives us the incentive, I think, to deliver those quicker than we had planned. I think Glasgow, like many cities as well, we also want to boost our city centre population. And it's not enough, though, simply to build accommodation. We need to design the city centre for people to live in, centres with desirable spaces and amenities. So again, there's a lot of public investment work going on in that and enormous opportunities. And I think just my final point would be backing all of that up is Glasgow's skill base, which within the UK and among UK core cities, it remains incredibly strong, with 6 universities within the city, others neighbouring, and we have one of the highest graduate retention rates in the UK. That's fueling some of those key sectors: life sciences, digital and tech, nanotech, a whole range of them, more than I've got time to go into today. But we're a city that is putting those connected economic, social and sustainable recoveries at the heart of everything that we do. And we're very keen to continue those conversations with the development community. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Lots of big issues there that I want to make sure that I give everyone a good opportunity in which to raise it. And just to kind of reinforce for everyone, I'll be asking a series of set questions to all of the panelists, and then we'll be opening up to Q&A. I see that we've already got a question that's come in Q&A. Please do send them in as the questions come in, and I'll try and aggregate all of them and make sure that we get to ask the panelists. So with that, I'm going to hand over now to Suzanne. Suzanne, levelling up is high on our agenda at the moment. Ensuring government is promoting and aiding the economic growth of the entire UK. Part of DIT's focus is on ensuring that investors know about UK cities and regions, and the vast opportunities for investment in real estate and infrastructure is something we focus on heavily. What are the major schemes, regeneration programs and business sectors that you believe will drive Belfast's future growth? And what are the main opportunities for Belfast? And what impact will Brexit have on the city? Now, I would like to remind you that it is the starter for 10 and we'll try and bring in a broader conversation. So Suzanne, over to you.
Yeah, because that's a very wide-ranging question, Gavin. But I'll try and do my best to answer it as quickly as I can, and then you can come in with more detailed questions. So, absolutely, levelling up is very, very high on our agenda here in Belfast. Belfast is the 12th largest city in the UK, but it's the second city on the island of Ireland, and it is very important from a significance point of view in terms of its positioning, and will be, I believe, even more important in the future in terms of its ability to still trade within the EU and also with the rest of the UK, and with a very special relationship with North America. So we have been very successful in recent years in attracting foreign direct investment to Belfast, and primarily in professional financial services, fintech, cybersecurity, etc. And a lot of big American companies have set up business here in Belfast. That has really boosted the office market, and last year we had the strongest office take-up ever in recent times here in Belfast, with nearly 1 million square foot taken up. And that continues. We have continued even during this awful period that we're all going through to get more jobs into this city, particularly in the fintech and cyber sector. We also have a new university being built now, will open this time next year. In the heart of the city centre, with 15,000 more students coming into Belfast, and that has created all sorts of new development around it, including over 5,000 new student bed spaces in the city. And then the next asset class, which is we've a lot going through planning at the minute, is build to rent, and a big focus on housing development going forward. So there has been a lot of private sector investment in the city, both at the waterfront and also in the heart of the city centre. And that's being matched with public sector investment as well, similar to the things that Susan has talked about. At the waterfront, we have a 16-acre site known as Waterside, with a huge mixed-use development, £500 million worth of private sector investment in that. And that sits alongside our harbour, which is investing in new film studios, the fourth film studio in Belfast, new visitor attractions as well, and a lot of new homes along that end of our city centre. In the city centre itself, we are investing in more office development for relocation of government offices. We're also investing in a new £100 million visitor attraction right in the heart of the city centre as well, and more city centre living. We want 8,000 new homes in our city centre. So there are huge opportunities to be gained in Belfast. And in terms of Brexit, just to touch on that as well. So clearly with the Northern Ireland Protocol, the whole purpose is that there is frictionless trade between North and South, and that means into the EU, and also with the Internal Market Bill, that is the same with the UK as well. So we do think we're going to be in a choice position, and you can imagine a pharmaceutical company being able to export into the UK in the same way that it can into Europe, or a financial services company who could set up its headquarters in Dublin and have its service centres an hour and a half up the road in Belfast. So we have some levers as well, which are great that we can pull on at this point in time. We have our city deal with a big investment into digital infrastructure, into digital challenge funding for our small innovation community, and also into centres of excellence around our growth sectors in Belfast. And that will mean that we will have clusters of business sitting alongside those, and large enterprises coming into Belfast and setting up business there as well. So like Susan, yep.
I was just about to say,
that's fine.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah. And I think kind of interesting to see some sectoral expertise kind of playing out in both Belfast and Glasgow. Jules, I'm going to play you in now. Suzanne mentioned American investors. From London's perspective, London continues to see international investors deploying their capital in traditional real estate assets. However, now COVID-19 has impacted the capital both generally and specifically in relation how has COVID-19 impacted the capital both generally and specifically in relation to regeneration planning and development? And how is London looking to recover? So Jules, over to you.
Great, thanks. It's good to join you today, even though it's virtually. I think probably when some of these questions were posed to us, I mean, we were probably thinking about recovery, weren't we? Whereas unfortunately, we're still stuck very much with an ongoing situation, guidance changing rapidly and differently in all parts of the country. So, you know, the huge potential for new national restrictions as well. So we're in probably a very different context to perhaps the one that we were hoping to be in just sort of a month or so ago. You know, as well as the challenges faced across the UK, London's been, you know, particularly impacted by the guidance to work from home. the social spaces as well, distancing in offices, public transport, and the problems that that's particularly created for such a dense rapid mass transport system as TfL, and also the impact on world's leading cultural institutions here. All that is adding up to an absolutely perfect storm. A lot of London's big major operations and industries have been able to successfully transfer their operations to remote working. But the real sort of impact on the businesses serving commuters and obviously the office-based consumers, especially in the central activity zone, is where it's been most severe. I mean, the mayor's doing what he can, but government really needs to step in with their support. The amount of support that is needed is way beyond anything that local government or even regional government could actually provide. It's interesting that in contrast, many of our high streets in outer London have actually seen something of a renaissance. People who'd normally commute into central London now supporting local economies more. Actually, that plays to a huge agenda that the mayor's interested in, played out through the London plan in creating a polycentric city. The new London plan really pushes London away from building outer London as a suburb, a residential suburb that people just could pile in on, Crossrails 2, 3, 4 and 5 in the century to come, into a dense work environment in the centre. So actually, if anything, perhaps this is an opportunity. The one silver lining, this is an impetus to actually to deliver on that. I mean, obviously, the furlough scheme's been very much welcomed in London. And that is really supporting what is most vulnerable, I think, in London, and that's the support industries, the accommodation, food, cultural industries, arts and entertainment. All this is an ecosystem that we need to make sure survives this as much as the kind of hardcore economic driver in central London. Because without that supporting ecosystem, London becomes a less attractive place to work, and therefore becomes less successful.
Jules, thanks for that. That's really useful kind of starter for 10 on both the challenges and also with some of the polycentric, which I'd love to kind of touch on a little bit later on, if possible. I might use this as a segue, if you don't mind, to go across to Hugh to find out how COVID-19 has impacted development in Cardiff, and what are the main opportunities for Cardiff, and do you think Brexit will have an impact?
Morning, Gavin. That's a lot to cover in 3 minutes, but
I know you can meet the challenge.
I mean, as you'd expect, and as we're seeing elsewhere, of course, there's been an impact. But actually, we have seen development continuing in Cardiff. And there are some major commercial developments, currently being taken forward in the city, with a good pipeline, still coming online. So if you were to come to Cardiff, you still see plenty of cranes. What I think we were already starting to see in Cardiff, and I think this is going to be the way forward really, is mixed use developments. So, for example, currently in the construction in the city centre is a site that's going to be both a bus station at ground level and then a combination of build to rent and office block above. And I think that will be the trend going forward, where you are mixing resi with some work environment and then a commercial retail space, and very much the ongoing economic strategy at the moment in Cardiff is to, if you're familiar with Cardiff, is to link the city centre with Cardiff Bay. So Cardiff Bay, the old Docklands, which was obviously in the 90s the biggest regeneration area in Europe. The two have never fully been linked up, and that's what we see the opportunity now through a combination of resi and office development, supported then by a pretty major investment in transport infrastructure as well. Part of the South Wales Metro, which is investing £750 million into public transport in the city region. I think you'll also see kind of infrastructure and public sector led regeneration, which then has the spin-off in terms of opportunities for the private sector. So There's already on the stocks plans to redevelop the central train station in Cardiff, which is around £150 million odd of public money, but then with opportunities around that for commercial developments. Likewise, we are on the outskirts of the city in the east. There's what will be Britain's only second privately funded railway station being built. That's to support a large business park, but that will also provide park and ride or park and rail opportunities into the city centre, which is just 7 minutes away by rail. Then, which will, when we have this recovery and events open up again, will be a fantastic boost for major events, particularly in the stadium. And then down in Cardiff Bay, we are in the latter stages of completing a tender process for an operator for an indoor arena, 15,000 odd capacity indoor arena, which the council is also putting some money into, but which overall has a gross development value of about half £500 million. So there's some significant development happening in the city. Obviously, we're concerned about the city centre and footfall there. Cardiff very much is the core for our city region of 1.5 million people, and there are 50 odd thousand jobs in retail and hospitality in the city centre. So, over the last few months, we've been looking at initiatives, that the council can take forward short term to drive footfall back into the city centre, using the castle in the city centre as a public open space, essentially free space for people to come in. Obviously, with the restrictions currently in place, meaning in effect you can't cross the border without a good reason, that's quite challenging. In terms of the residential side, we have a local development plan that still runs till 2026. That's got provision for 44,000 new houses. That's across greenfield and brownfield, and I think that's actually really appropriate in the new setting of COVID, both in terms of driving higher residential density in the city centre, but also recognising, if you're in your 30s, you want some space to spread out. And what developers are telling us is that there's really strong demand, both locally and from outside, for those strategic developments happening around the edges of the city.
Hugh,
and then finally, Brexit.
I'm just minded, so please do go on, and then I'll play Tony Reeves in, who I'm sure will be just as keen to tell us about Liverpool's.
Just very quickly on Brexit then, Gavin. I mean, like most cities, we have a higher percentage of European citizens living in the city, and the biggest portion of our trade goes to the EU. So from our perspective, securing a trade agreement with the EU is fundamental, both in terms of our economic prosperity, but also in terms of social cohesion. So, yeah, we'd really like the government to deliver on that. Thank you.
Fab. Thanks very much, Hugh. And apologies, I love hearing from all the different places. Just keen to kind of make sure that we get all of the panelists in. Tony, what will be the main drivers for Liverpool's recovery? And can you discuss some of the challenges or opportunities that COVID-19 presents in both the shorter term and the longer term? I think we heard some interesting innovations from both Hugh and also some of the challenges from Jules. So keen if you would be able to pick up that from Liverpool's perspective.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And obviously, Liverpool, the Regeneration Liverpool really kick-started with European Capital of Culture in 2008, and has really transformed the city over the last decade or so. And we were flying going into COVID, really making progress in the city. Our city region's economic growth was the highest in the UK at that point, and obviously the crisis came at just the wrong time in lots of ways. But and this is, I think, building on a point that Susan made earlier. The key thing to recovery is, in my view, is about playing to your strengths, not trying to reinvent the wheel. We, right at the start of the crisis, we started work on our economic recovery plan. We submitted it now 3 months ago to government. I think it was 6 weeks ahead of any other city in the UK, with really clear business cases behind the proposals that we had there. And our core strengths that we're building our recovery around are about innovation, about the visitor economy, around housing, and about employment and the skills. And obviously, with the threat to jobs that COVID has brought, and particularly with the headwinds of Brexit there as well, generating jobs is going to be an incredibly important part of that. So we focused, and in terms of innovation, that's particularly around health and life sciences and digitech. Over the last 4 or 5 years, the Knowledge Quarter in Liverpool around the universities has become one of the most significant innovation districts in the UK, and with huge growth potential. Particular strengths around infection control and digitech, obviously really important at the present time. The Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine that's attracted nearly $500 million of investment from the Gates Foundation, playing a world-leading role in some of these spaces. And during the height of the crisis, we did a deal with Bruntwood SciTech, that's a JV with Legal and General, where they've taken a 25% stake in Liverpool Science Parks, and we think there's massive potential there. So 2 of the 3 really big capital projects that we've submitted to the government are shovel ready. The Tech Central scheme in Upper Central, which is a new development area of 2.5 million square feet, directly between the university's Lime Street station and Central Station, that will connect the Knowledge Quarter into the city centre. And at Paddington Village, at the top of the Knowledge Quarter, where it's already home to the Royal College of Physicians, Kaplan International School, Rutherford Cancer Centre, the next major building of more than 100,000 square feet for science and tech-based businesses there. We've also got a great project, which is very near getting over the line, at the old Littlewoods Pools headquarters on Edge Lane, just outside the city centre, for a film studio. Obviously, Suzanne talked about film. Liverpool's the most filmed city in the UK outside London, and the growth and demand for filming in the city has grown exponentially in recent years. And we have a proposal there where the scheme is already 65% let, with Twickenham Studios and Liverpool John Moore University. And we anticipate that scheme being on site in the next few months. So a really strong drive, around innovation, sustainability, and playing to our strengths. And our whole strategy is to make sure we come out of this flying. And just the final point, city centre footfall, because of hospitality and visitor economy, is huge for us. Obviously, it's well reported we've got a bit of a crisis with COVID figures spiking at the moment, but we had brought back more than 85% of our footfall in the city centre over the last couple of months. So even though we're going to have to dial things down again in the short term, we know what to do to bring that back, and we're very confident we can do that.
Thanks very much, Tony. And one of the things that's kind of become apparent is we should be running more sessions like this, because there's clearly a lot to talk about, and lots of both challenges and also opportunities. With that, though, I'm going to hand over to Melanie Leech. In the work we do, we have strong professional relationships with the private sector and local government. To best enhance our investment offer, I believe that it's vital that both private and public sector are appropriately aligned. Melanie, how can UK cities and regions and the government work together with the property industry to support the economic recovery post-COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Gavin. Good morning, everyone. And pity the poor person who has to go last after such a fantastic array of speakers. But actually, to a large extent, I think the other panelists have done my job for me in answering that question, because they've illustrated in their different regions and areas is how strongly already how important public-private partnerships are to success in their areas. So, we've heard lots of great examples of how the public sector and private sector have been working together to create fantastic real estate that creates fantastic, sustainable, economically vibrant communities. And that vision, that mission is not going to change. It's going to become, I think, more and more important as we try to come through COVID and build something sustainable for the long term, for the future. And Jules talked about the fact that we're still actually in a period of flux and change, and we don't really kind of, we're managing day to day as well as trying to maintain focus on the long term, because of course real estate's a long term industry, and you take decisions for the long term and you build for the long term. So we still have to navigate through all of the challenges that other panelists have talked about.
And we do know that things are changing. I mean, we know in retail, for example, things are already changing as we move more and more of our activities online. The retail footprint in the UK was shrinking in our cities and towns, and that trend has been accelerated by COVID. It's probably sort of speeded it up and put it into fast forward by several years probably. But that change was happening anyway, but COVID's accelerated it. I think we are seeing something quite interesting going on in terms of office working. Culturally, we seem to be in a different place in the UK to other parts of the world, where actually you've seen quite high numbers of people going back to offices quite quickly. Whereas in the UK, there's a real sense, I think, that culturally we're not in the same place. We're still at 15, 20%, even before we had some of the new interventions and over the last few weeks, 60, 70% in Paris, low double digits in some parts of the UK, and even in London, sort of 20, 30%. There's something quite interesting going on there, and we don't yet quite know how that's going to play out, but we do know that we're going to have to plan for a slightly different future. We know that people are changing the way they think about where they live and their aspirations for the type of home they want to live in. Green space becoming more important, access to outdoors, and all those kind of things. So trying as a real estate industry to manage all of those factors whilst taking decisions for 15 to 20 years is an interesting challenge, and it's no different to the challenge facing local leaders as we've heard. And I guess what attracts private sector investment? It's vision, it's clarity of vision, it's clarity of purpose, it's alignment of objectives. And that's going to be more important than ever. And you've heard fantastic examples from other panelists of how they're providing that leadership, continuing to provide it, leaning into the challenges and creating the picture for coming out the other side. And that's important for local communities and local people. That's important for investors. And that's, I think, important for the country, thinking through Brexit. We have to come through with a vision and a clarity of purpose. And if you do that, I believe investment will still be there. Now, it's true to say national government's not helping us at the moment. I mean, uniquely as a sector, national government has legislated to intervene in the contracts between landlords and their tenants. Now, as a short-term measure, we saw that in a number of places around the country. That's manageable, but I think the longer that goes on, the more investors will start to lose confidence in one of the jewels of the crown in terms of why UK real estate is attractive, both to domestic and overseas investors, which is the sanctity of the contract. So that needs to be dealt with. But I'm confident that, with inspired local leadership like we've heard about, investment will be there, partnership will be there from the private sector. And that's, I think, a positive message to take away.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Like some massive issues and themes kind of articulated in this context. We've got a series of questions that are coming in the Q&A box, which I will seek to answer or seek to pose to the panelists. Some of them are very large, so I don't think any one person can kind of answer them individually. Before I do, can I call Catherine back in? There's going to be a poll run, and so I'll hand back to Catherine to allow you to find out more about what the poll entails. Catherine.
Great. Thanks very much, Gavin. So we are launching a poll and we'll be running this all throughout the week. It's going to come up on your screens now. What is the most important factor in unlocking development and ensuring the continued strength of UK real estate? You've got a multiple choice. You can choose any or all of these options: investment in transport infrastructure, investment in technology and digital, building a carbon zero sustainable future, investment in innovation via grants, enterprise zones and similar structures, FDI and inward investment promotion, delivery of housing, what's here, and investment in social infrastructure and a skilled workforce. So if you could all, those of you that are taking part this morning, take a few seconds to answer that poll. And as I say, we will be tracking people's views throughout the week. Currently, we're looking like building a carbon zero sustainable future is currently leading the field, not unsurprisingly, but it's moving around a fair bit. So Gavin, do you want to continue, and we'll keep an eye on this and update accordingly?
Thanks, Catherine. So a couple of the first questions from both Stephen and Peter are around international investment. So I think one of the points Stephen makes is around the last thing we need in our cities, especially London, but not exclusively, is international investment into UK real estate. So I'd like to kind of frame this slightly differently. I would welcome comments from the panelists and around the benefit, your perception of the benefit that international investment brings. Suzanne, you mentioned kind of some of the American investment, and also what value does international investment bring to the cities in which you're operating? And then Melanie, maybe from an industry perspective, what this brings. So I don't know whether or not anyone wants to particularly pick up where international investment adds value to your local proposition. Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the point I would want to make is that it's perhaps not so much where the investment comes from, but the type of investment model that it is. I'm moving away from an inward investment model which has a sense of perhaps taking away from the place, but towards one that is about contributing to place and to community. And regardless of where those investors come from, that's what we are looking for in Glasgow, is investors who have a commitment to the city, have a commitment to the community, are in it for the long term, who want to work in partnership with us in the council and with other agencies like the National Enterprise Agency, Scottish Enterprise, for example, and with national government, Scottish government, as well as local government, and who are committed to sharing our vision of what we want for our communities and for the city, both in the immediate and longer term. So it's that kind of committed investment, I think, that's crucial, and which I get the sense we're seeing more and more of, that investors are actually looking to cities and to places that have a vision that they can be part of and that they want to be associated with, reputationally and for their shareholders and investors as well. So it's that long-term partnership, I think, that matters rather than the source necessarily. It's the outcomes and the delivery of those outcomes for citizens and communities that matter.
Thanks, Susan. Tony, did you want to come in on this point?
Just very briefly, I completely agree with what Susan has just said. For me, the source of money isn't the biggest issue, and I think that there isn't a lack of money to invest in real estate, and there's unlikely to be a lack of money over the medium term. The issue is about having investable propositions, and so from my perspective, there's sometimes too much focus on FDI coming into real estate in the UK. British pension funds, annuity funds, etc., are looking to place money in real estate in really good propositions. So I think the focus needs to be on having investable propositions and decent returns rather than on the source of the funding.
Thanks. I think kind of distinguishing between the different types of investors is absolutely fundamental, and I think kind of where government should be supporting is something that my team specifically is kind of very big on, that it is the right kind that adds value to places. I'm going to move on to a question from Mark Jenkinson. So Mark's question is, Suzanne mentioned the importance of digital and Jules talked about local high streets. I'd welcome a comment from the panelists. What is the future of city centres, and how can digital technology and society come together to create healthy, safe, supportive, accessible, easy to navigate, resilient communities which are fit for purpose? So please do come in. I'm just having a look at the which of the panelists might like to come in on this particular point. I don't know, Suzanne, whether or not you want to come in on this point.
Yes, happy to, Gavin. Absolutely, and I totally agree with the person who asked the question. That's how we should be reimagining our city centres. I mean, we all know that retail was already suffering before we went into lockdown, We were already reimagining what our city centres were going to look like. They have to be spaces which are much more mixed use, which are much more livable, much more green space, and much more active forms of travel. And lovely to see little parklets, pocket parks and things popping up, and much more use of traffic lanes as cycle lanes, etc. And and the whole idea of this kind of 15-minute city. But I think in terms of digital and what it can do, in terms of reimagining how we live in an urban environment, absolutely we need to have that infrastructure, we need to have wireless technology, we need to have 5G. We should be, moving around our city in a way which is digitally enabled. We should also be looking at how that enables us to solve our urban problems and use our innovator community to do that. So the idea of smart districts and innovation districts which are digitally enabled is definitely the way of the future.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hugh, did you want to come in on this question or the previous question? But over to you, Hugh.
It was on this question, and Suzanne's pretty much hit everything I was intending to say in terms of the 15-minute city and the livability of the city centre. The only thing I would add really is that there is still a challenge, because cities tend to be the core for their region, and so the retail offer that exists within city centres has been sustained up till now by travel into the city centre from outside the city boundary proper. And I think the challenge for all of us really is how do we maintain an acceptable level of footfall back into those areas. So I think in part that is still about how do you use office space going forward in a way that's effective and appropriate. My sense is that people will still want, once we're out of this pandemic, will still want to at least meet in office spaces, particularly if you're maybe a slightly younger demographic where your personal space, if you live in a flat, is limited. But I think I see much more of a role for councils going forward in terms of animating city centres as well, putting on events, be they major or micro events, as a way of generating that footfall into the city centre as well. So I think that will be an important part of our response going forward as well.
Thanks, Hugh. Jules, how does this relate to the polycentric model, particularly for a city the size of London? Did you want to tell us a little bit more about thinking within London on the polycentric model?
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully we'll get the London plan finally published anytime soon. And that, as I say, pushes for a lot of things that people have been talking about mixed use. And I say this polycentric idea that really speaks to the 15-minute city. We were already there with that. I think 95% of London is within 10 minutes of a high street, something like that. So we really need to make a virtue of that. But I think the local high streets, they're a good example of I suppose the whole theme that I'd want to sort of get into, which is that it's not about whether we'll come out of this, and I think there's no question that we're going to come out of it strongly. London always does. It's had fire, floods, pestilence before. It's always going to come out of it out of it strongly. But the challenge, not just for London, but for every part of the country, is: are we going to come out of it well and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? Have we got the tools and levers to curate places? And that's a big question mark now that we've got uncertainty and a lack of clarity of vision in planning now, because we've got 4 or 5 years of potentially uncertainty because of the planning white paper. And I'm sure it's going to get kicked about a lot by local MPs and local councillors and in the Lords, but it is definitely a period of uncertainty. And we actually want certainty, clarity of vision, so we can curate places, whether they're high streets or whether they are our major cities. And I think for me, in 20 years of local government and half a dozen years at a London level and last 4 years at City Hall, it's never been about pushing for growth. Growth was going to happen. It's about growing well. And I think for me, that's about investment in transport and in social housing. So we grow well. It's never about growth for growth's sake. It's never even actually been about just increasing rate of growth or the volume of growth, because growth's going to happen. But is it going to be for the benefit of the existing communities and the new communities that you're creating? So for me, it's all about vision, clarity of vision, certainty, but backed by investment in transport and social housing, which the industry alone can't provide. There just isn't enough money in development for it to all be self-funded.
So Jules, big issues, and also I'd welcome comments whether or not, Melanie, this is a point that you want to come in on, or whether or not the kind of the London experience is represented in other cities. But I think the underlying point, Jules, around coming back, like growing well, is a really interesting and kind of vital point. But Melanie, did you want to come in on anything that Jules has just raised?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. And I really agree with that. And one of the things, I was just reflecting as Jules was talking, one of the things I've really seen in the 6 years I've been in this role, coming into real estate with no background in it, so seeing it and watching it over those 6 years, is the real shift in mindset that's gone on amongst, certainly within my membership, but across the industry, in terms of a much greater focus on people as our customers. And therefore, that sense of, we're not just building buildings, we're creating places, and we're working with public sector leaders to create great places, to manage great places, to curate great places. I think that I've really seen that grow and that mindset change within the industry over the last few years, and I think it absolutely resonates, and it's absolutely to Jules's point, and that's what we need to see going forward. And that links, I think, to what Susan was talking about in terms of patient capital, because patient capital wants to make a difference. It wants to add value. It wants to invest for the long term in place, not just in buildings. So I think that's why Susan's points were so resonant. And the other point, I think, is that, I absolutely agree. We shouldn't be thinking about trying to get back to where we were. This is not just about building back. We're not just trying to replace what is lost and what has changed. We have to be creating a forward-looking vision and building on where we are now. And of course, there's going to be many hardship stories over the next few months of individuals with businesses. Not everybody's going to come through as in the life that they've known for the last few years. But we have to turn that and give people a positive sense of how they can move forward to something different, rather than just build back to where we were. So, Jules, I absolutely agree with the sense of what you're saying and the points you're making.
Thanks. Yeah.
And what Melanie said there about the big developers, really speaking, and acting on that agenda, and I absolutely agree with what she said. There are some great examples, whether it's Lend-Lease or Grosvenor, some of the great estates, and that actually reinforces this idea about curatorship. I suppose where my worries are is where ownership is fragmented, and then who is in that leadership role. And I think that's where local government and regional government have that role, when you haven't got a great estate player with a large ownership. And I think, that's why I say, local authorities and the planning rules is how that curatorship is delivered.
Thanks, Jules. Do any of the other panelists want to come in on this particular point, or we might move on to one of the other questions from Emma. And Emma is referencing, if anyone wants to raise their hand or kind of come in at this particular point in time, otherwise I'll move on to another question, because it's such a big agenda that we've got to cover. Emma made a really interesting point around Tony's comment on Liverpool's regeneration and recovery being kickstarted by the capital of culture, and she referenced the clear plan for the Thames Estuary production corridor, and kind of the creative industries and their impact on growth. Suzanne, you touched on it briefly, and I think, Tony, you've also mentioned it as the importance of the creative sector to the economy. Do panelists want to kind of articulate any particular interventions that they're undertaking to support the creative sectors within your places? So Tony or Suzanne, I'll pitch it at you, given that you've been specifically referenced. So Tony, is there anything on your side that is going on at Liverpool level?
Culture, our mayor refers to it as the rocket fuel for regeneration in the city, and it has been for more than a decade. And despite the fact that the creative sectors are being hit really, really hard at the moment, we absolutely think they're central to our future. We've worked really hard to support businesses through a very, very difficult period. And just on Friday, we announced with our city region partners a £40 million fund to support businesses through the immediate crisis until hopefully there's further support coming in from government, which we're talking to government colleagues about at the moment. But for me, it's not just about the cultural sector as a part of the economy itself. It's actually how it animates our place. So if I talked earlier on about the Knowledge Quarter in Liverpool, and innovation districts across the world are pretty sterile spaces come 6 o'clock at night, but not in Liverpool, because you have the Philharmonic Hall, and orchestra there. You've got the Everyman Theatre. You've got Hope Street. You've got a whole host of other things there, right in the heart of the innovation district, that completely differentiates it from other places. So we don't just see culture as a sector on its own. We actually see culture really in the DNA of the city, and that sort of creative industry is really bringing the whole place to life, making it very livable, but also attracting talent and making it a really great place to come and do business, and for talented people to want to come and work. And we really do put culture absolutely at the heart of our vision for the future of Liverpool.
Thanks, Tony. Suzanne, do you have any response in relation to Tony's comments or the broader questions around the creative sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Liverpool, Belfast does see culture and arts and the creative sector as the lifeblood, really, of the city. And of course, it's absolutely fundamental. If you're going to retain your talent, if you're going to attract more talent, if you're going to attract more investment, it's absolutely fundamental that the city has the right vibe. And so that's what we are investing more in culture and in capacity building for our sector over the next period of time. So because Liverpool was the last European capital of culture in the UK in 2008, Belfast, along with some of the other English cities, did apply to become the 2023 capital of culture. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't actually go ahead with that because we exited the EU, but we had decided in Belfast that we are still building a 10-year cultural programme as part of that big process that we went through. And so we're investing more and more every year for the next 10 years to really stabilise the sector. And of course, then putting a lot of investment into the businesses as well that sustain the sector, whether that's the film industry, animation, etc. as well.
Thanks, Suzanne. I've got the impossible task of trying to get final comments from each of the panelists. I'm going to go to Susan. Susan, in 20 seconds, what is the biggest opportunity for the UK moving past COVID-19? And I'm going to set and then I'll come to Hugh after it. So 20 seconds, I'll try and see if I can get to all the panelists in the remaining 2 minutes.
Okay, I was just going to say Glasgow is probably the poster child for cultural regeneration in the UK. This is our 30th anniversary of Glasgow being the city of culture and absolutely transforming our reputation, I think, as well as the city's economy and public places. The opportunity for the UK is that green social justice recovery, to make sure that the response to COVID is a response that builds for the long term and isn't short term. My concern is that the UK government just now is thinking too short term, and it needs to embed the kind of thinking around stuff like extending furlough to understand that that's an investment that will pay off for the future.
Fab. Hugh, any final comments from your good self on the biggest opportunity for the UK post-COVID-19?
Again, in 20 seconds, Gavin. I think we've got to have the courage to back ourselves. There's some good messages coming out from number 11 in particular, but be that investment into green renewables or investment into our city centres, I think it's got to be at a much larger scale than what we are currently talking about. The term New Deal is being bandied around. When you look at the original New Deal, that was on a different scale to what the UK government are currently talking about. So we have to have the courage of our convictions in terms of what we pump into this, I think.
So I have failed in trying to get around to all the panelists, but I think having the courage of our convictions is definitely kind of a key message. And in amongst some of the challenges that I think we've heard around particular interventions or particular pockets, pleased that so many of the places have got such a bold agenda on trying to support the right kind of recovery, as well as the points around attracting the right kind of investment to make sure that cities are supported in the long term. Please, thank you to all of those who've attended. I've tried to get through as many of the questions from the panelists. Panelists, massive thank you from me for your time and your generosity. I'm really grateful for your insights and perspectives. And as I mentioned earlier on, I would be quite happy to have sat here and talked to you all for another hour. Unfortunately, we don't have that time, so I'll hand you back to Catherine. Catherine.
Thanks very much, Gavin. A huge thanks to you as well for facilitating this panel. The good news for all of you that are watching is that there's lots more opportunity to pick up on these subjects that have just been touched upon very briefly in this opening keynote, because we're actually going back to most of you, most of these places in the UK, and having specific sessions talking about just these issues. Just today at 12 o'clock, we're heading into the city for a piece around partnerships working in the City of London. We're then moving into Waltham Forest at 1 o'clock. We're back in Liverpool at 2 o'clock, so we'll be able to hear more about how Liverpool is creating a dynamic city region at 2, and then finishing up the day at 3 o'clock, going into Croydon and looking at how the regeneration is being delivered and how the planning implications will impact that. And then later on in the week, we are going to Belfast, we are going to Glasgow, you name it, we're going there. We're going to seaside towns, we're going up to Scotland to talk to have a ministerial Scottish keynote. So there really is lots of opportunities. If we didn't get to your questions, you will have ample opportunity to take those questions in further sessions. So do head to the website where you will find more information. I just want to finish with the results of that poll, and not unsurprisingly, sort of top 3 things within a smidgen of each other. 40% carbon zero, as you would expect. There we go, it's just popped up on the screen. 46% actually ended on carbon zero, closely followed by investment in social infrastructure, and we've been talking about that as an importance, and the skilled workforce, and matched alongside that at 37% technology and digital infrastructure. So not one clear thing as we'd expect, it's about mixing all together to come out into the new normal, as we are calling it. Thank you again to everybody. We look forward to hearing from more of you later on this week, but for now, thank you and goodbye.